Well, hello and welcome to the Confessional Close-Up. I am Christine Cisneros, and I am so pleased to be here with you in these moments. The name of our piece this week is Skin in the Game. And today we're going to be talking about 5 different songs in this piece. Some of them I will read the lyrics for you and expand on that a little bit. But suffice it to say that this is going to be a very lyric-heavy piece. I hope that all of you had a meaningful Mother's Day weekend. It means so many different things to so many different people. And while all of us got here the same way, the informational data and archetype of mother is but a shadow in comparison to what each of our mothers have meant to us. And so I'm going to start in with the first song, and I'm going to read these lyrics, which is I've Got You Under My Skin. And this is, of course, written by Cole Porter. I've got you under my skin. I have got you deep in the heart of me. So deep in my heart, you're really a part of me. And I've got you under my skin. I have tried so not to give in. I have said to myself, this affair, it never would go so well. But why should I try to resist when I know so well that I've got you under my skin? I would sacrifice anything, come what might, for the sake of having you near, in spite of a warning voice that comes in the night and repeats in my ear. Don't you know, you fool, you never can win? Use your mentality. Wake up to reality. For each time I do, just the thought of you makes me stop before I begin, because I've got you under my skin. This song has always struck me as, of course, a love song, but it's really a lovely testament, I think, for what happens when the 2 channels of DNA come together to create the one channel that will move on into the future from the genealogy and the lineage. And in this, what we see is the polarity of the 2 sexes, of the 2 lives that were brought to the planet in the same way. And against so much of the popular belief that the 2 sexes should be the same or should resemble each other, what we see is this beautiful polarity brings about the next consciousness on the planet and the next voice to be heard. I've got you under my skin. There is nothing closer than that. There is nothing closer than being under the skin. And as the 9 months of gestation, usually 9 months, goes by, there is this growing awareness of what might be next, but also the anxiety and the excitement for what is the unknown about to unfurl. I've got you deep in the heart of me, so deep in my heart you're really a part of me. Is that not so? That is completely the truth. I have tried so not to give in. I've said to myself, this affair, it would never go so well. And this is a sentiment that I've seen in so many expectant mothers and heard stories about some of the worry, the concern, founded or otherwise, primarily on what could go wrong and perhaps how to avoid that or prevent it. And so much excitement for what will be passed on and shared to the next generation in this lineage. And she says, but why should I try to resist when I know so well that I've got you under my skin? And I look at that as, why should I try to resist the hope and the joy and the excitement of the future when I know so well that I've got you under my skin, that the miracle has already taken place, no matter what occurs after that, that the spark of life and the union of the polarities have met and have created something that is undeniably, in even the spiritual photosynthesis of creation, a mystery, a miracle, and the most important gift that we could ever receive, which is life. I would sacrifice anything, come what might, for the sake of having you near. And I think this is really interesting because the child being in gestation and being in the womb and growing is as near as it's ever going to get. And yet this next moment in time when the child has been birthed out into the world, that the conviction here is that I would sacrifice anything, come what might, for the sake of having you near. And that to me implies that the child is no longer within the body, but that everything will be done so that the nearness of the mother to the child is continually protected and provided for the development of that new life and the protection of not just the child's heart, but the mother's heart as well, ushering in to his or her purpose through this very, very special part of parenting. In spite of a warning voice that comes in the night and repeats in my ear, "Don't you know, you fool, you can never win. Use your mentality. Wake up to reality." And these feelings of doubt, of wondering how that's going to all work out. What if this happens? What if that happens? How can I even dream of having this? And the warning voice serves as a signal, not for impending doom necessarily, but the particular importance of how deep and resonant this welcome task and reward will be. Just as when we regard data, information, schematics over the one thing that is always, it seems to me, underestimated, and that is the resolve of the human spirit in matters that are non-negotiable, such as when it comes to our children and the irreplaceable love that follows. Each time I do, just the thought of you makes me stop before I begin, because I've got you under my skin. And again, this anxiety or the beginning of the worrying, perhaps pacing at night, isn't halted by some report or doctor's advice or the validation of others, but by the only thing that can truly be effective at that moment, which is the realization of this miracle of life being under the skin. And so this most paramount of work to bring another human onto the planet through your own body, though accomplished countless times, is a fresh and new moment for each occurrence. And the reiteration of the chief factor in all of this is, of course, the importance of DNA. This deoxyribonucleic acid, that is the molecular structure that carries the genetic instructions for all living things, is the data that really no one pays attention to because of the actual manifestation and the visceral playout of the full spectrum, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional experience of the lineage and the human race expressing itself in the most undeniable way, which is a baby. Every year when I think of how incredible this time is of remembrance, and interestingly, a time of when the remembrance was about the expectation of what would be in the future, it never fails to impress upon me with each passing year how being under the skin of my own mother and watching there be another under the skin of my sister, and then emerging from a hospital on May 15th, the day that my niece was born, and seeing the world in a completely different light and in a completely different way than I had ever seen the world. And it wasn't because the rest of the world changed. It was because this new life in the form of my niece changed the world by being here. My eyes were different. And through all that happened after that point, I have never returned to the eyes that I had before. And though my sister and I shared the same mother, shared the same home growing up, and share the same DNA, this was the very beginning of realizing how sometimes it's so hard to see or feel what is there because skin is so close to you that we do, of course, mistake it for our identity and not the place through which we have perspective of that which requires some objectivity to hold a broader regard. And I think that perhaps attempting to achieve an analytical perspective on things that are so close is often overrated, if not almost impossible. And while, just as in this song, there is the fear of what could possibly happen next, or a fear of the unknown, for no matter how we say things are planned or unplanned, what we are always certain of is the change that will be employed. And I think it's interesting that pregnancy is called an expectancy, because how can we even really know what to expect as an outcome? And I think more accurately, what I regard expectancy as is expectant and then S-E-E. Expectant and then see what occurs and what emerges. Often in the anxiety of wanting to do everything right for this future that is coming, what I love to witness is the tipping point of excitement that happens as this child's entrance into the world becomes closer and closer. And that indeed there is some regard over the excitement that was mistaken for anxiety. And the line that is blurred between the two is where the surrounding DNA can come in like the second skin to fortify and comfort and hold the expectant thoughts, not of what exactly is going to happen, but to be absolutely available for this event that will only happen once for each life that is about to enter. As well, I love the proof in nature that often flies in the face of, again, data and analytics that seemingly try at this point in history to anthropomorphize everything except people and to nearly neuter both of the sexes by attempting to create only one sex, shearing off, at times literally, the expression physically of life, and an over-focused lens on the differences between the two channels that create the one, encouraging more of the anxiety, the fear, and thus division. And so when nature has its way, which it always does, we find the most bona fide of proof in the marrying of the polarity of the two sexes and channels that create that which could not be created otherwise. And as we are always encouraged in the natural scheme of things, in God's law, to, as the scriptures point out, and as Jesus said, faith without works is dead, that in our faith and in the faith of God, who continues to allow us to be the channels through which He provides life, we are well aware, at least on some level, molecularly and basic, that our population is not based on an idea, a thought, or a hypothesis, but rather the proof of fertilization incarnate. This to me is the skin in the game. This is the faith with the works. And as much or seemingly as little as we were planned for to come to the planet, we ourselves planned to come here, to suit up, to bring on the skin, to get in the game. And again, in the funded faith throughout human history, through our ability to perpetuate our species by this beautiful gift from God, we see the evidence of what we have been entrusted with, chiefly life itself, but also what we are to do with this life, what we are to do with this magnanimous investment of being carried for 9 months and nurtured and grown into someone who can make decisions and choices independently of everything that fostered us. And we ask, such a deep investment, and what will we do with it? Those precious 9 months is a time filled with joy and fraught with some of the anxieties that we've talked about. And it's all handed to us to decide whether or not we are going to further this investment by way of how we live and what we do, or create a giant expense that perpetuates nothing but the anxiety of which there is an abundance. I say this not because there isn't a risk involved at all. I'm not saying that these anxieties are unfounded. No. But as we know in anything that we have poured any amount of energy into, that the worry itself is an indication of the level of care and regard for this purity and holiness that we are imbued with. As I said, every year this is such a great moment in this pocket of May, wherein there's Mother's Day and there's my niece's birthday on May 15th, coming up this Saturday. And as many of you know, what creates a sort of bittersweetness to this time is that my niece is not suited up in this DNA and skin any longer. And in her transition and transformation from this physical recipe, what I know is that though she was 4.5 at her transition, that she continues to teach me things, and she guides me with wisdom that has been paired with the patience of God for the time that it has taken me to allow its revelation to become these jewels in my life. There are ways to describe how she was in the typical terms of what people would expect. She was funny, she was playful, she was incredibly intelligent. She could be a little mysterious and withhold a bit, but it seemed as though we always found a place to make each other laugh a lot. And if I had not witnessed all of this firsthand, I would look at the analytical story of Demetria on paper, where all the boxes are checked, where all of the information seems consistent, but none of it very relevant when you could look in her eyes and watch her crack a smile that I could never describe with words or music completely. There have been times when I have spoken about her to other people, and I've kind of gotten used to this reaction or response over the years, which has ranged anywhere from, "Oh wow, that's really horrible," or "What a terrible thing." And I would say, yes, it is terrible. There is nothing more terrible, I think, than a child becoming sick and dying and watching this process. And I can honestly say to you that there is nothing more terrible or heart-wrenching that I have ever seen in my life than my sister not wanting to give up her child at the last. This image has stayed with me for all of these years, and I'm sure will follow me to my end and perhaps beyond. And while there are so many that say, well, death isn't really death, and it's not really, it's just life again, and to a certain degree, I really do agree with that. And yet we must be willing to face and be immersed in this very precious experience of the loss of someone we love so dearly before even entertaining any thoughts of how that is not as relevant as what comes next. The next song I will talk about is a song called "To Wish Impossible Things" by The Cure. And when I play this song, it's impossible for me not to think of Demetria. Remember how it used to be when the sun would fill up the sky. Remember how we used to feel. Those days would never end. Those days would never end. Remember how it used to be when the stars would fill the sky. Remember how we used to dream. Those nights would never end. Those nights would never end. It was the sweetness of your skin. It was the hope of all we might have been that fills me with the hope to wish impossible things. But now the sun shines cold, and all the sky is gray. The stars are dimmed by clouds and tears, and all I wish is gone away. All I wish is gone away. And in the depth of that moment, to deny that it feels as though all that we wish is gone away is not just ridiculous, but something that actually prolongs the suffering, as often the denial of the truth does. There seems to be, in this time of regard for relationship as liability, and in fact, I knew someone who refused to get close to my niece for fear of her possible demise. And while I can look back on that and see the fear, plain and simple, at the time it enraged me, because what hurt so immensely about watching this little girl that was my niece be in pain and in suffering at times was that she wasn't a plastic bin or a dog or a cat. She was a human being. And the great offense, and I think sin, of creating division and an ostracizing of a child due to her illness, due to her inability to control what ailed her, also made its mark on me to be at least aware and present to the suffering of those around us, rather than be just attentive to the impeded comfort zone that is sometimes protected more than the heart of a child. The difficulty of losing a child immediately is a difficulty and a calamity all on its own. Losing a child along the way is something wherein the moments that ensue hold within them a thread of consistent re-injury to see such suffering. But I find that beyond all of this, while the aforementioned cannot be avoided, what I'd like to bring to our attention is the losing of a child by way of viewing them as liabilities and sources of pain. This is more offensive to me than nearly anything else, because it is avoidable. It is stunning to me that I have encountered so many who have no response to suffering and death, only a reaction. And that reaction that I've seen is usually a small noise and then silence. I've heard many times that people react to death in different ways. And in fact, when sharing some of this story with someone, I remember them giggling. The explanation was, it's a nervous reaction. And I find this to be unacceptable. For all of the antidepressants and behavior modification and the scores of families who have now lived through knowing their child is going to pass, living through their child passing, and then living in the aftermath of the child having passed, that if the heavy lifting that is done by these families and by the children that are actually doing the suffering are moments that we are now well aware of, then it doesn't seem too tall of an order to at least mature enough to the point of being present to each other as human beings, perhaps not in the same DNA and family lineage, that is, but in the greater scope of our human family at large. When I've heard the questioning of what can be done about the suffering of children, the exploitation of children, the trafficking of children, what I often am chagrined by is the same people that will speak about this, but will distance themselves from even listening to the recounting of suffering and death that is right next to them. As well, there is the sanctioning for the time of grieving and an expectation to return to what is deemed normal. And I find this to be astoundingly inhumane. As though I had grieved incrementally, the majority of my grieving process, the depth of it, didn't really ensue until years after Demetria had passed. And honestly, it might have even been partially because I had completely run out of the reserve of making sure other people were comfortable with this part of our familial history. And I'm sure, as the years went on, I could see that the end of the familial lineage through my maternal side was certain. It occurs to me that there is also a sentiment, I think, at some juncture in this, that there might be the crossing of some path with Demetria as her transition was nearly complete, and the specific aloneness that I think everyone feels when the loss of a child, a grandchild, and a niece occurs. I thought of this year as I discovered a song called Motherless Child by Van Morrison. And the lyrics are, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Long way from my home. Oh, sometimes I wish I could fly like a bird up into the sky. Sometimes I wish I could fly like a bird in the sky, a little closer to home. Motherless children have such a hard time. They have a really hard time a long way from home. Sometimes I feel like freedom is near. Sometimes I feel like freedom is here. Sometimes I feel like freedom is so near, but we're so far from home. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, long way from home, and we're so far from home. And in these moments of closure, when we are what we think is all alone, this is as dark as it can get before the realization that we are home in God. But to deny, again, this feeling of untetheredness, even when he says, sometimes I feel like freedom is so near. Sometimes I feel like freedom is here. He ends it with, but we're so far from home. In essence, this untethering will lead to where? Is it freedom? It feels kind of like it, but we're so far from home. And this is juxtaposed in a way that seems almost contradictory. And yet what we know are these two channels of life and death, as in our progenitors, as in our parents, as in the DNA that mixes, that it takes both of these energetics, both of these intentions to marry together and become the outcome of the freedom that is felt so near. And thus, in this motherless child situation, what we also know is that as life goes on, that the actual natural order of things is that just as we brought everything to the welcoming of a new life onto the planet, that we bring the even greater everything to the farewell of that which we came through, which are our mothers. And that at some point when that happens, there truly is the realization of being a motherless child. And I also think that our mothers are the only ones that saw us when we couldn't see ourselves. And what a thing it must be to watch your baby slip away into childhood, and to watch the child slip away into adolescence, and then into teenagehood, and to have that slip away, that teenager slip away into adulthood, and to even watch your child who became an adult move into their middle age, and sometimes even more, if we're lucky, to see the disappearance of each person as it transitions into the new life that it is designed to go into, and to know that wishing impossible things for the DNA personhood that Demetria had, that her slipping away was not a slipping away into being an older child and a teenager and a young adult and into middle age. That her mission here was to reiterate the miracle of life and the bringing together of the two elements, basically, to create that new spark. But also to bring together all of the strands of the DNA and the family that knew her and loved her and cared about her every single day. Knowing all the while that, just as Khalil Gibran says, that our children are of the house of tomorrow, of which we will not visit. And what an odd and yes, terrible and enlightening thing to understand that we are the children that will not visit the house of tomorrow that Demetria is not in. That our faith is strong in knowing that She is with us every day, with a presence that does not avoid us or deny the history and the past, and does not shy away from the story of our family. She stands proudly by as we live this life and shine the light that we have, that she had, as she was strong enough, brave enough, and pure enough to bring everything she was to this world and to show us all how she put 100% of everything she had to be the jewel of our family, entrusted by God, so that we could really see what it is to put our skin in the game.